Garrett Crochet is being thought of as the ace of the Boston Red Sox rotation heading into the 2025 season, but here's why any one of their starters could be that number one.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Gabby Maljanian, former ESPN social media associate and current host of the Boston Balling podcast as well. And I am here to bring you the latest in all things Boston Red Sox, Monday through Friday, straight to your favorite podcast feed. And it's completely free, so you might as well continue to tune in because Locked On is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on today's show, but I am here with Chad Jennings, Red Sox reporter for The Athletic. As you heard from our conversation on Friday's episode, we talked a lot about the second base situation, Alex Bregman versus Rafael Devers at third base, and a little bit about the backup catching situation. But what about the pitching, an area that the Red Sox did address this offseason, and why does their revamped starting rotation feel like it can be a super competitive one? Another area of this team that was addressed this offseason was the pitching, which was a must going into the offseason. That was like the biggest area of need where I said, if they do not improve this pitching staff, then it's not going to matter what else they do. So obviously it started with Garrett Crochet, but then they even went ahead and signed Walker Buehler, who I feel like is somebody who could end up being kind of an underrated move from the offseason if he pitches well, because this is also a guy who has experience winning and is coming off of a great showing in that World Series against the Yankees. And I'm kind of excited to see what he can bring to the table this year.
Well, yeah, I mean, think of like where the pitching was. I mean, you bring in, like you said, I mean, look, Tanner Houck had a great year. I still think Brayan Bello is going to be really good. But the upside of Crochet at the top, and then now you're at Walker Buehler's what, the number 4 starter?
Yeah.
And I mean, hell, it could be number 5, right? I mean, if you think of like Giolito has also been very good at certain times, so like times of his career, coming back and is like a big. I was thinking of this while I was down there. Like, I guess traditionally you'd think of Crochet as the ace of the staff, right? Like that's sort of how we assign the value. Like he's like the highest upside guy throwing 100 and all this. But there's an extent to which Cora talked about at one point, like that Crochet is also not the guy he's never been like the big, like 200 inning guy. He's only had 1 year as a full-time starting pitcher. Like there are still things about that job that he's learning as he goes that some of these other guys, particularly Giolito and even Buehler, think back to like, his best days in LA where, he was a Cy Young contender. Like and Tanner was an all-star last year. And Brayan Bello was like one of the best pitching prospects in baseball 2 or 3 years ago, who's already signed the big deal. Like, who's the number one? It kind of depends on what aspect of their game are you talking about? Like they all kind of have these, they all sort of check these certain boxes. It's an interesting rotation, and still with, Cutter Crawford coming back from, he's kind of been down a little bit. I don't know how far behind he is at this point. But that gives them some depth. It also speaks to some of the depth that they've built and some of the optionable depth that they have that they even were talking about a 6-man rotation coming into the season. That speaks not only to having 6 guys they like, but that they feel like they've got a roster now that has some flexibility in the bullpen in terms of some guys who can come up and provide depth, who can give you some long relief. And, maybe I don't know, you bring up a guy and have to burn through him for 3 innings. You can swap him down and bring up another. That depth matters here. And it's going to come up a lot. And I think they've done a decent job of giving themselves some of that flexibility that lets them do some other things with the pitching staff. But you're right. In terms of like you started, I was talking about that what they had to address was pitching. And there's no doubt that's true. That's part of what made Bregman such a kind of a vibes changing move at the end. Is like they did the thing they had to do, right? You make the huge move for Crochet and you back that up by getting Walker Buehler. And then, you're also, you bring in Chapman, who throws really hard, which everyone knows that's an element that they just didn't have last year. They had no real velocity coming out of the pen. You've got Liam Hendriks coming back from injury, who brings this like certain edge to him. Like he's out there pumping his fist and screaming F-bombs in the spring training game. Like he's a maniac. Like that's a certain edge to the team, right? And that's like the pitching needed that, man. They needed some sort of like, they needed that boost. And so you felt like they'd done that. And then it was like the, whatever you want to call it, the cherry on top is all of a sudden they go and they find the right-handed bat. Like, I think that's what made this offseason such a, the feeling around the team changed so much because they started by like addressing the one thing they absolutely had to have. And then they went out and got the thing that you didn't necessarily have to have, but man, it makes them a lot better.
Yeah, there was definitely something that Andrew Bailey said at Fenway Fest that stood out to me about the pitching staff. And he was talking about the rotation in particular. And he said, every single one of these guys is capable of being a number one. And that to me is super exciting. Like he just sees aspects in all of them that could make them a number one theoretically. And that just really takes it into perspective of how good this rotation could actually be. Obviously, health is a factor for sure, but I do think if you look at these pitchers on paper, this rotation has the ability to do some really good things this year. And the bullpen definitely is still a bit of a concern in terms of, certain players that have been struggling. But I even look at guys like Quinn Priester or Richard Fitz, like guys who have shown potential. Like those are players who I don't think are being talked about as much that could be even considered as coming out of the bullpen this upcoming season. And it's nice that the Red Sox have options now because it doesn't really feel like they've had those options the last couple of years in the pen.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think that's absolutely true. And you don't know, I mean, it's part of the reason that teams want to stockpile all this rotation depth is you can often, those guys find a way, right? You end up using them one way or another. And the other, return of Whitlock too could be huge if he can stay healthy and fall kind of back into that role he had when he first joined him. Was that summer as a Rule 5 pick, right? Like a guy like that who can come in and give you a lot for 2 innings, right? That's the way modern bullpens are run. That role is so big. Whatever. Bello's running out of gas. He's used a lot of pitches, but it's only, there's 2 outs in the 5th. And then you can bring Whitlock in to like get you through the 5th and through the 6th and maybe even part of the way into the 7th, right? Like that covers over so much stuff. It just allows it lets your whole staff sort of work a lot better when you have that guy who can bridge that gap and kind of get you through from a shorter start all the way, to the back end, whatever the back end ends up looking like, whatever order they're in. But yeah, I think that makes a big difference for them too.
Yeah, that closing situation also is a question mark heading into the season is which one of those guys is going to be the closer. Are they even going to name a closer or are they just going to kind of have different guys kind of try out that role as the season progresses? And then if somebody is definitively better in that role than others, then he kind of just becomes the closer, because that to me feels like what they might do. Like I wouldn't be surprised if opening day comes and they haven't named a specific closer because there are a few different players that they see being somebody who could fit into that role.
Yeah, I agree. I could see that feels more like what's more likely to happen here. And also, maybe you do have, whatever, say Hendriks is the closer. But if one game you've got a team that's lined up where a couple of lefties are going to be up in the 9th and they're all right-handed in the 8th, could you just swap it for a day and have Hendriks pitch the 8th and save Chapman for the 9th? Probably. I still think there could be a little bit of flexibility there, though I think that Cora I do think he learned something from the year when he tried to use Barnes. Remember, he tried to use Barnes as strictly like his highest leverage guy for a while. He wasn't like really the closer, and he just basically like destroyed him for 2 months. Like it was just like high intensity every single time, and it just didn't. It was I think it was a great experiment, a thing to try that looked like it would work on paper. And then it was just one of those like, oh, it's not on paper, right? It's a guy who's trying to get through this every day. So I do think they're going to want somewhat of a defined role at some point. Those guys do like, I mean, these people are, they have their habits, they have their routines, they like doing what they do. But I would think with two veteran guys like that, there could be a little bit of matchup stuff there in the late innings if you want to play it that way.
I'll get you right back to my conversation with Chad Jennings, where you're going to find out if there's a serious concern with Liam Hendriks heading into the season. But first, I do need to tell you a little bit about FanDuel, because March Madness is here and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I love March Madness so much because you never know who's going to win on any given day. That's why they play these games. Upsets happen, and that just makes it so much more fun. And I do have my eye on a few underdogs this year. So FanDuel makes it easy to back those up with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. You won't want to miss out on that for sure, I promise you. So make sure you download FanDuel today. Are you concerned at all about the fact that Hendriks hasn't looked incredibly sharp so far in the spring, or do you think that's more a result of him just kind of getting back into the swing of things?
Yeah, I guess it's also, I mean, how many outings does he have? 2 or 3?
Yeah,
like it's not,
that
I mean,
many.
it's just not enough to feel like I know much of anything about sort of where he is or where he's going to be. And you know, I mean, you could flip the switch opening day, right? Like, I mean, it just, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't, I don't feel like it tells you a whole lot, but I do think as you get later into spring, maybe you start paying a little more attention to it. You know, Chapman's throwing really hard right now, which is interesting, but we'll see, you know, like, what does that mean? You know, he's going to throw 112 this year, like probably not, you know?
Right, yeah.
So
that'd be cool.
So yeah, no. I mean, you know, I still think there's a lot of time to start sort of feeling like you actually are learning anything here. And even then we'll probably be wrong, right? I mean, I feel like every year it's like second week of April and we're making fun of all the idiots who made too much out of spring training. And then every year we get to spring training, we're like, well, I don't know.
No,
Look at
so
this.
True. It's so true. It happens every single year.
Yeah.
It's so true. There's always those people though that naturally are like, oh, this player's going to be so bad this year because he doesn't look good now. But
and you're watching it going like, oh, I mean, he really doesn't look good. You know, like, I mean, it's like, how do you deny it? Right. You're like,
no, I mean, I definitely have moments like that though during the spring where I'm like, oh, this player is struggling right now, like in this game. But then I have to remind myself that it's just spring training and they're all kind of getting back into the groove of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I still remember like a long time ago, one spring, LaTroy Hawkins was in Yankees camp and had like, I mean, it was like he pitched like 12 times, had 2 hits and no runs. I mean, he was just dominant. And it's toward the end, and I was fairly new I was covering the Yankees at the time, and I said something to him about like, you know, but you got to feel good about how your spring's gone. And he goes, man, spring training don't mean shit. And it was great. Like, and I just have never forgotten it. Like, this dude is just shoved for like a month and a half. And just as soon as it came up, he was like, no, this means absolutely nothing that I've done this. Like, it, you know, just, that was like such I don't know, the veteran insight of like me as the young reporter trying to like make a thing of this and the older player being like, no, do not make anything of the fact I've pitched well down here.
That is hilarious, actually. Yeah. I mean, he's not wrong, but
really funny
that he put it out there.
I've always remembered that. Like, that's like this, like, it's one of my favorite like quotes that was ever given to me, but also like the perspective was so perfect that anytime I feel myself starting to make a big deal of anything spring training related, it's like, what would LaTroy say? Yeah.
That's so funny. Were you able to get any sort of clarity on the Wilyer Abreu situation when you were down there? Because he says that he thinks he'll be ready to go by opening day, but there hasn't really been a definitive timeline really given for him.
Yeah, no, so my last day, my first stint in camp, my last day was when he started doing stuff. So I talked to him that day. I was like, "How'd you feel?" He felt fine. And he said, "Yeah, they tell me that they think I'm going to be okay for opening day." But also, again, it's like you said, I mean, it's close enough that like we've seen too often where a guy has like, it feels close enough where it's like one of those where like if he misses 2 days for something, right? Like doesn't feel well or whatever it is, that sets it back. And you could, could you then, a very short term IL stint for him to start the year, maybe. Again, it's probably one of those like spring training things that we get really worked up about. Like come August, are we going to really care if Wilyer was on the IL for the first however long he'd have to be there? Probably not. But it is interesting. I mean, like, like then you start trying to look around at like who else is going to play right field. Like, would they just play Ref Snyder against lefty or play Ref Snyder against both lefty and right? Would you play? I don't know. I mean, they
involve Yoshida in the outfield and move people around.
Yeah. I mean, Yoshida's got to start throwing. I mean, I don't even know if Yoshida's going to make the team if he's supposed to be playing the outfield because he can't throw yet. So, I mean, but again, these feel like short-term early April problems that are not going to be that big of a deal. Like I think Wilyer Abreu is going to play this year. He's going to be out there at some point. So I don't know that, yeah, he's a little bit borderline of whether he's going to make the team out of camp. I'm not sure that impacts all that much, but we'll see.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of funny when you think about just like how much time there is between now and the end of the season, because like you just look at the timeline of really how the season progresses. And when you start in spring training, it's like there are so many guys that could be in that type of situation as he is. But obviously, I think people are excited about the idea of Abreu this year based on the season he had last year, which makes a lot of sense, myself included. I'm really excited to see him this year. So I think there could be people bummed if he's not ready to go on opening day.
No question. And it is like a absolutely, it's kind of what spring training's for, right? Like, I mean, we started this conversation talking about backup catchers. Like minutia work, like baseball and minutia are like hand in hand, man. Like the people love like roster stuff and like who are they going to DFA? Like who they DFA is probably some fringy guy who's like barely going to ever play in the big leagues, but we all get worked up about it. It's fun. I enjoy it. I like that aspect of it, that we all care about the 26th man on the roster, that we're out here like debating like what Romy Gonzalez's role is going to be now that they have, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, that's just fun. Like it's all the nature of baseball. And so, yeah, I'm not knocking. I'm just saying like, is there like whether Wilyer Abreu is in right field on opening day or just like in the middle of that first homestand? I mean, it's a very like, it's a very mid-spring training story that you worry about a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, is probably not going to make that much of a difference. He still looks, it's not like he got sick and now like just looks horrible and you can tell he's like lost all this weight and he looks like Wilyer Abreu. I think he'll probably still be able to yank some left-handed home runs and be all right.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if it was the type of situation where he might miss more time than.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he could, but it's like an illness thing, right? So it's more just him being behind schedule. It's not like he didn't like blow his shoulder out or something. He's just got to catch up on the reps, and so some of that's going to depend on. I mean, if he comes back and all of a sudden he's seeing the ball really well right from the get-go and he's moving around fine and he feels good and he can still hit like, it's not the worst, especially at the beginning of the year where he wouldn't. I haven't looked at like what the rotations might look like, but he's a guy who mostly plays against righties. So again, he's coming off of a illness where he's kind of just getting himself up to speed. That's maybe a little bit easier to do when you're going to have some built-in days off in the beginning of the year, right? If he's like splitting time with Ref Snyder in right field, like, do you have to be all the way up to like 100% endurance and everything when like you're probably going to play 2 out of the first 3 anyway? You know what I mean? Like he can kind of ease his way back in and get there.
Hope you're enjoying my conversation with Chad Jennings of The Athletic, as the Red Sox are primed for an exciting season. Just so you know, if you do want to continue to follow Chad's content, you can check out The Athletic website, where he writes extensive articles about this Boston Red Sox team, reporting on injuries and what's going on and all the happenings surrounding the team. But I also have you covered here Monday through Friday on Locked on Red Sox with all of your Red Sox needs on any podcast platform. Just subscribe to the show on YouTube or any of those platforms, and you can listen every day if you want to hear the latest Red Sox news. So make sure that you continue to make Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every day. And for your second listen, now that it's that time of year, you can listen to Locked On Fantasy Baseball next with host Dominic Martino and Matthew One. MLB Fantasy Draft season is here. Be the most informed fan and set yourself up for a league win. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. You definitely don't want to miss out on that to get all of your fantasy tips and tricks as you get into your draft, so that you can absolutely own your league this year. So that makes sure you check that out today as well. This is all a good problem for the Red Sox to have right now, is just how many options that they have. I mean, we haven't had this type of problem in a bit, where we're having a conversation of who's going to play in that spot because there's multiple options for these various roles. Like, we just haven't had that type of conversation this extensively in a bit, because the talent that they had, it just hasn't been as good over the last few years. And the fact that they now have this roster that feels like there are so many options in various spots, like, this is a good, exciting problem to have as a Red Sox fan.
Yeah, they're gonna. I mean, on any given day, they're gonna have 2 or 3 guys on the bench who are like really pretty good players. Who in theory could have been playing a little more regularly, especially with the Yoshida situation, right? Like, you're used to, like, oh my God, how are you going to not give Yoshida at bats? But, like, I mean, you'll end up finding ways to give him at bats. Like, there's going to be playing time there. But also, like, that's just a little bit of a sign of an improved team, that a good player who was getting, sort of regular, semi-regular at bats is now having to fight for some playing time. Like, that's just because your roster's better.
Yeah. And I feel like now we can look at this team and say, like, more confidently that we feel like this Red Sox team could be a playoff team. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's many factors that take place during the season. We don't know in terms of injuries what's going to happen with guys, but I'm looking at this Red Sox roster as constructed right now, and I truly feel like that team is a playoff team.
Well, and you're seeing it in some of the playoff odds and things that are showing up. I mean, the latest FanGraphs, the last time I checked, had them like, it was like the Yankees projected to have the best record in the league, but by like 2 or 3 wins over than this group of, like, the Red Sox and Rangers and I don't know, like, who was the other one? I don't Orioles maybe. Like a group of, there was this group that they're sort of in that. The Royals are just, or the Royals, the Red Sox are kind of like in that next tier. If the numbers suggest the Yankees are supposed to be the favorites, fine. But then there's this group that's like right there of, like, one of these teams is going to break out and also be really, really good. And they seem to have just as much of they seem to be just as viable in that role as anyone, right? I mean, take your pick of, again, Rangers, Astros, Twins, maybe Orioles, Red Sox. Like, they're all kind of in that mix of, like, teams that you could imagine being really good.
Yeah, the Yankees are definitely, if I look at the AL East right now, the team that, for the Red Sox, if they do want to win their division, that would be the toughest, I think, for them. Like, I'm looking at the other teams, like the Orioles, Blue Jays, Rays. The Red Sox, I could see the Red Sox finishing ahead of all of those teams, obviously, if things go well for them this year. But the Yankees, to me, feel like a team that it's going to be tough, I think. Like, I'm not saying the Red Sox can't win the division, because I definitely think it's possible, but the Yankees are a good team right now. So I could see them being a team that gives the Red Sox trouble.
Yeah,
especially because
I mean, that's a good,
really good.
yeah, they're a good team. It's a good division again. I mean, it really is. It's not, I mean,
Yeah.
I think if you're a Blue Jays fan, you're probably disappointed again that you missed out on some big things. And the Rays continue to do things the way the Rays do. And I think there's probably rightfully should have been a push for the Orioles to make some sort of bigger move given what they have. But it's a division where you don't have any team that's given up, and every team was like trying to build and has some. It's a really good division again, and that's even you look at the NL East, it's Braves and Phillies and Mets, but then there's this big divide, and then you get down to the Nationals, and then whatever the Marlins are doing. Even in the West, it's like Dodgers way up here, but I mean the Rockies could lose 110 games this year. Like, I mean, they're not good. And then there's no real evidence that they're trying to be good. So the AL East is an outlier in that way. It is the one division still like where it's 5 teams that going about it in different ways, but they're all trying to win.
Yeah, it is interesting. You don't have like a complete bottom of the barrel team in that division like you do with some others. Like for a while, the Orioles were that team that was just losing over 100 games, but now it's like you don't have that type of team. And the Blue Jays, I mean, they underperform compared to the roster that they have every year. So that's definitely interesting. But obviously, speaking of the Blue Jays, Vlad Jr.'s name has been floated around potentially with the Red Sox when he hits free agency after this year. So that situation, because you mentioned Casas, that'll be interesting to monitor too, are the Red Sox serious about a guy like Vlad? Because how much do they value Casas? And I think, we could get some of those answers this year based on the type of season that Casas has. Because obviously with him missing most of the season last year, we want to see what he can do this upcoming season after he had such a strong rookie year. So I'm interested in seeing how things go for him this year and how serious the Red Sox would be about a guy like Vlad.
Yeah. I mean, look, Tristan is a fascinating player in almost every way, right? Like he's approach is different. His personality is different for a baseball player, right? Where you're used to players who kind of like try to back away, and Tristan kind of is who he is, and it's fun, and he hits, and he's a good hitter. But yeah, he hasn't been healthy enough to sort of have his career sort of take off, I think, in the way that we maybe expected a couple of years ago when he first showed up. You kind of thought like, okay, now's when he starts to go. And so maybe that happens this year. But it is an interesting spot to see, if this can be that year when he solidifies himself as like he is the answer at first base for the long term.
Yeah, big year for him. Big year for a lot of players on this team, but it'll be a fun season. I think as a Red Sox fan, I think we'll experience a lot more pleasure when it comes to watching these games than we might have over the last few years when things have just been very frustrating as Red Sox fans. And I think there's a lot more fans that are buying in again and are ready to, watch Red Sox baseball again and are excited for what this team can do. So the vibes seem to be really good. I mean, you can probably confirm that a little bit better than me because you were just down there, but it seems like the vibes with this team right now are very good. Yeah,
listen, it's amazing what spending a little money and having a big offseason will do to start to make people really believe and buy in. Because you're right, they have a good young core that started to show up last year. Now it's building around it and sort of really maximizing that. And then I think, at least you saw them this winter commit to that. And I think that should go a long way toward, as you're saying, like just the vibes and the feeling around the team are up.
Yeah, which we love to hear. That's what we love to hear as Red Sox fans. But Chad, this was so awesome. Such a pleasure having you on here with me. I always love talking Red Sox baseball, and this is just a great team to talk about because there's just a lot of fun players that we're seeing emerge here and lots of fun things to talk about when it comes to this specific group heading into 2025.
Yeah, they're an interesting group. It'll be it's going to be a fun year to follow. I think there's a lot of talent. And as we alluded to early on, like there could be more coming, right? So it's an interesting time to see them both in the short term feeling like they're competitive again, and then also, you still can sort of look long term and dream on some more players coming up in maybe the really near future.
Yeah, I know. Near future literally could mean this season. Like I've mentioned that on the show quite a bit, actually. I was like, I would not be surprised at some point this year if we see any of these guys' names come across on that Red Sox lineup card. So very excited for that. Thank you so much for tuning in. Everybody, As always, I appreciate you tuning in to Locked On Red Sox. I'll be here counting down to the season with you, and I hope to see many of you at Fenway Park for games this year come April 4th, which is when the Red Sox home opener is. So definitely looking forward to that. Thanks so much to Chad. And as always, like I say at the end of every show, let's go Red Sox, and I will catch you next time.